Hello, my name is Esther Murray and I work at Barts and the London Medical School. I teach various things to medical students, but what I also do is research the psychological well-being of healthcare professionals. And my specialist area is moral injury. Moral injury describes the psychological harms that we might experience at work when poor decisions are made either by us or those in leadership positions in high-stakes situations, and these contravene our moral code. In this series of short films, we're going to be thinking about the psychological effects of working in the pandemic. We're going to be thinking about ourselves, about us as members of a team, about maybe us in leadership positions, and how organisations can work together to look after staff.
So Esther, can you just explain to us a little bit on what moral injury is? Because for a lot of people, that's going to seem like quite a strange technical sounding term. And can you just unpack that a bit for us?
Yeah, of course, thanks. So the conditions for this seem to be that something happens which contravenes your moral code and in a very high stakes situation. But it best describes the psychological harms that come from the wrongness of a thing.
And you use the word the wrongness there.
Yeah.
So does wrongness have to have an intent behind it? Or can it be a circumstance?
Yeah, it can absolutely be a circumstance. So everybody has a moral code. So this is why it's useful to talk about something like moral injury as opposed to, say, PTSD. Because we're not trying to say, look, some people are going to become disordered as a result of this, and some people are not. What we're trying to say is everybody has a moral code, and when it's violated strongly enough, that's going to have an effect on you, possibly for a while. And it can absolutely be circumstances. When I started, I really thought, oh, it'll be all those, it'll be everybody in emergency medicine and pre-hospital care. It'll be all those big, like train crashes or terrorist attacks and things like that. That's what'll do it. But when I started to speak to people, I was wrong. That wasn't it at all. It was lots of small things for lots of people and things which even they didn't expect sometimes.
Esther, tell us though what you mean by moral code.
Okay, so what I'm describing when I talk about someone's moral code is their belief about the world. So it's a set of beliefs about how the world should be and what's right and what's wrong.
Oh, that's quite simple. Can you just describe, as in a succinct way as possible, what moral injury is?
Yes, so it is quite hard to describe in a succinct way, but I will try. So because the world feels so wrong, okay, and this feeling becomes global, okay, so not just one situation that feels wrong, but it's everything, and it feels unfixable, and they can't bear to be in it, especially if someone feels they've done something wrong. So you'd see someone turn away, they're not quite present. So I suppose if it was someone you knew, you'd see their sort of disengagement with you and with the rest of the team. It's a bit like a kind of greying out of their personality and their sort of involvement in the world because they're shutting down that part of themselves. And a lot of I don't care type stuff might come out.
Let me try and explain to you what I think I now understand. When your moral code is violated, so your set of beliefs about how the world should be, or the standards that you hold yourself and others to, when those are sort of contravened in some way, there's an experience that causes you to sort of withdraw or shut down because you can't proceed in the way that you think is acceptable. And then there's a sort of some knock-on from that.
Exactly that, and it changes all your relationships with other people. If you feel that either you've done something or somebody who's part of your team or someone in power, someone who's kind of connected to you, maybe they're in charge of you, they've done something that has led to bad outcomes. What we tend to say to ourselves as people is, well, what does that mean about me? Like, where do I fit then in this puzzle? And the problem with that sort of thing is that it sparks off feelings of shame and guilt. And the thing about those feelings is that they naturally encourage us to turn in on ourselves and away from other people, because that's exactly what shame does, isn't it? It separates you from other people. So you would see somebody who was suffering, you might not have a name for it, but you might see that they're suffering by the way that they don't connect so well with other people anymore. They don't feel as open as perhaps they used to. And so the other problem with when we shut ourselves down like that is that when we're closed off to other people, how can they help us?
Is this something that we should avoid? So I'm going to get injured. Do I look for injury coming, or I'm going to see it down the road?
I don't think you can avoid it if you're a human person. I really don't. I've really thought about this. Like, okay, so how could we just stop this happening? But I don't think you can, because certainly in healthcare, you're going to see things that are really difficult to see. And that's really what it's about. So one of the really classic examples might be children being hurt by their parents, that kind of thing. Mass casualty events. And if you like, COVID's a sort of slow burn mass casualty event, isn't it? We're seeing a lot of death and a lot of morbidity. And so it's not something we can really avoid necessarily. It's certainly something we can mitigate. And it's certainly something, if we can recognise it, we can at least talk about what has happened in a way that doesn't judge anybody, it doesn't pathologise anybody. So we all have our different reactions. Some people are actually doing pretty well, they thrive on situations like this. Some people are really, really struggling. Lots of people will blame themselves for the ways they're reacting, so they'll judge themselves for doing well or doing badly. But we need to just make space for all of it.
Recalling some of the things that I've read or people have said to me, you know, the feeling at the moment appears to be it's not ending. The pandemic is not ending. You know, I don't know how much it's about care compromise, but certainly at the moment, just not being able to look after their team properly. The loss of the social interaction. Someone said to me the other day, the thing that's really affected their team is that they can't have cake together for a birthday. You know, like, it's really fundamental.
It's a terrible thing.
It's just terrible.
It is.
Don't call him the caterpillar.
Is everybody morally injured? Do we need to speak much more broadly about actually just what's happening and just the, I've heard you speak about just the kind of greyness associated with this time.
Yes. So I don't think we need to speak only about moral injury at all. At work, there's always a culture, isn't there? So your team or your, however big it is, has a culture of its own. And in each culture, we have practices that mark occasions. And so Colin the Caterpillar birthday cakes are a very fine example. And when our celebrations, and this is big for a lot of us, when our celebrations and our markers are taken away, it's really hard for us, because our relationship, for example, with time is that we mark it out in these chunks with weekends of celebrations and cake, or it's Friday cake, or whatever it might be. And when those are taken away, what then? And it's funny because I think it makes us sound not very grown up. Sounds a bit like kids, doesn't it? But it's actually just people. It's just people. And everything that was familiar, almost everything that was familiar, is gone.
So what would your thoughts be with regards to people in leadership positions who want to support but are possibly anxious about actually undermining people's normal coping mechanisms in the way that has happened in PTSD in the past? Yeah,
so what's really useful for people is putting stories together. So for example, if there's been not so much an incident, but say in the current circumstances, if there's been a really rough day and a series of rough things have happened, or a rough week, understanding why clinical decisions were made, for example. So checking in with the story, what was the process here? Why were these decisions made? Is everybody clear why we did what we did, regardless of outcome? And actually, regardless of whether they were right or wrong, it's about stringing a coherent narrative together from what feels like chaos, and it feels like something really out of control. So we can do that for one another, not a problem. You can do it in a team, you can do it with individuals. And reminding people that they do have coping mechanisms. So a conversation you could have with another individual would be about what do you usually do to feel okay when you feel as bad as this?